The fluorescent lights in the office building hummed with the same monotonous drone they'd produced every morning for the past 11 months. I shifted the stack of file boxes in my arms, feeling the sharp corner dig into my ribs as I navigated the narrow hallway toward the storage room. The fabric of my cardigan sleeve rode up half an inch, and I immediately adjusted my grip, tugging the material back down with practiced urgency. The motion was automatic now, muscle memory developed through months of careful concealment. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor, each step echoing in the empty corridor. I'd arrived at 7:15, as always, a full 45 minutes before anyone else would begin trickling in. The early arrival wasn't about ambition or dedication, though my supervisor certainly appreciated my punctuality. It was about having time to compose myself, to check my reflection in the bathroom mirror, to ensure that every bruise was properly covered, every lie rehearsed and ready. The scent of expensive coffee wafted from the executive floor above, mingling with the faint smell of lemon polish and printer toner that permeated our administrative level. I'd worked as an assistant at Morrison & Associates for nearly a year, processing contracts and filing reports for what appeared to be a legitimate corporate consulting firm. What I'd gradually pieced together through overheard conversations and carefully worded emails was that Morrison & Associates served primarily as a front, handling the legitimate business operations for a much larger, much darker enterprise, controlled by the De Laurenti family. I'd never met Matteo De Laurenti himself, though his name appeared on documents I processed with regularity. The other assistants whispered about him in the break room, their voices dropping to reverent murmurs when discussing the man who supposedly controlled half the city's underground operations, while maintaining the polished veneer of a successful businessman. They said he was cold, calculating, dangerous. They said he could read people like open books, detecting lies before they were fully formed. They said he never forgot a face or a favor. I hoped I'd never have occasion to test the truth of those rumors. The boxes in my arms shifted suddenly as I rounded the corner, and I stumbled slightly, my shoulder colliding with something solid and unyielding. The impact sent a sharp pain radiating through my upper arm, directly over the purple-green bruise Evan had left there 3 nights ago when I'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. I bit down hard on my lower lip to suppress the gasp of pain, tasting copper as my teeth broke the healing split that ran along the inside of my mouth. "Careful." The voice was low, controlled, with the faintest trace of an Italian accent softening certain consonants. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. Matteo De Laurenti stood directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of bergamot and leather. He was taller than I'd expected, probably 6'2", with dark hair swept back in a precise style that emphasized the sharp angles of his face. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, fitting his broad shoulders and lean frame, with the kind of perfection that spoke of custom work by master craftsmen. His eyes, a striking shade of dark brown that appeared almost black in the hallway's lighting, fixed on me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "I'm so sorry, Mr. De Laurenti," I stammered, taking a hasty step backward. The movement caused my cardigan sleeve to slip again, riding up to expose a 2-inch strip of discolored skin along my forearm. His gaze dropped to the exposed bruise. The change in his expression was subtle, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. I yanked the sleeve down immediately, heat flooding my face as I scrambled for an excuse. "I'm fine, really. Just clumsy," I said quickly, the lie tumbling out with the ease of long practice. "I fell on the stairs at my apartment building last week. The landlord keeps saying he'll fix the loose railing, but you know how it is." Matteo didn't respond immediately. He studied me with the kind of thorough assessment I imagined he applied to business deals and potential threats, his dark eyes moving across my face with methodical precision. I fought the urge to look away, knowing that breaking eye contact would only confirm whatever suspicions were forming in his mind. "What's your name?" he asked finally, his tone casual, but his gaze remaining sharp. "Helena Rossi, sir. I work in administrative services, 3rd floor." "Helena." He repeated my name as if testing the weight of it. How long have you been with the company? Almost a year, Mr. De Laurenti. He nodded slowly, still watching me with that unnerving intensity. You arrive early. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I prefer to get ahead of the day's work, sir. It's easier to focus before the phones start ringing. And you often carry boxes that large by yourself? I glanced down at the files still clutched in my arms, suddenly aware of how my hands were trembling slightly. It's part of my job, sir. Records management. Matteo stepped closer, and I instinctively tensed, a reaction I tried to hide but knew I'd failed to fully suppress. He noticed, of course. Men like him noticed everything, but instead of commenting on my obvious discomfort, he simply reached out and took the boxes from my arms with practiced ease. The storage room? He asked. I nodded, too surprised to form words. Matteo De Laurenti, the man whose name made seasoned businessmen nervous, was carrying my file boxes. He moved down the hallway with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own power, and I followed a step behind, my mind racing. The storage room was at the end of the corridor, a cramped space lined with metal shelving units holding years of archived documents. Matteo set the boxes down on the designated shelf with precision, then turned to face me in the confined space. The room suddenly felt much smaller with him in it. These stairs at your apartment, he said, his voice deceptively casual. They must be particularly treacherous to cause bruising in that pattern. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'm sorry, sir. Bruises from a fall typically show on the knees, palms, elbows, impact points. His gaze moved to my concealed forearm, then up to my face. The pattern I saw on your arm looked more consistent with gripping pressure. Someone's fingers specifically. The air seemed to thicken in my lungs. I forced myself to maintain eye contact, to keep my expression neutral, to deliver the lie I'd perfected through months of practice. I caught myself on the railing when I stumbled. My own hand gripped my arm to prevent falling. It was a terrible explanation, anatomically impossible if you thought about it for more than 3 seconds. But Evan had trained me well in the art of delivering confident lies, and my voice didn't waver as I spoke the words. Matteo was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching my face for cracks in the facade. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but carried an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. Look at me, Helena. I was already looking at him, but something in his tone made me truly meet his gaze, made me unable to look away. Now, tell me who did this to you. The question, delivered with such certainty that someone had indeed done this, that my carefully constructed story was transparent, hit me like a physical blow. For a moment I wanted desperately to tell him the truth, to explain about Evan, about the way he used his position as a police officer to make me feel like no one would ever believe me over him, about the cycle of apologies and accusations, the gifts followed by rage, the way he'd isolated me from my friends until I had no one left to call. But fear was a powerful suppressant of truth. Fear of Evan finding out I'd talked. Fear of the consequences if I dared to name him. Fear of being dismissed or, worse, blamed for provoking him. No one, sir, I whispered. I told you, I fell. Matteo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, holding it out to me. I took it with trembling fingers, noting the embossed lettering and the single phone number printed below his name. If you fall again, he said, his tone making it clear he knew exactly what kind of falling I was doing. Call that number, any time, day or night. Before I could respond, he moved past me toward the door, pausing only to add, and Helena, I don't believe in coincidences. When people lie to me, I usually find out why. He left me standing alone in the storage room, his business card clutched in my hand, my carefully constructed walls beginning to crack for the first time in months. The business card remained in my wallet for 3 days, tucked behind my driver's license where I could pretend it didn't exist, while simultaneously knowing exactly where to find it. I went through my daily routines with mechanical precision, arriving early, staying late, maintaining the professional demeanor that had become my armor against the world's scrutiny. But everything felt different now. I'd become hyper-aware of Mateo's presence in the building, tracking his movements through the floors above like a deer monitoring a predator's position. Twice I'd seen him in passing, once in the lobby, and once in the executive elevator, and both times his dark eyes had found mine with that same penetrating assessment that made me feel simultaneously exposed and protected. On Thursday afternoon, my supervisor Claire called me into her office with an unusual request. "Mr. De Laurenti's executive assistant is out sick," she explained, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping against her desk. "He's requested someone reliable to handle some filing in his private office. I'm sending you." My stomach dropped. "I'm sure there are others more qualified." "He specifically asked for you, Helena." Claire's expression was curious, but not suspicious. "Apparently, you made a good impression earlier this week. Don't mess this up. This kind of assignment could lead to better opportunities." I wanted to refuse, to claim illness or urgent work on the 3rd floor. But refusing a direct request from Matteo De Laurenti wasn't really an option. Not if I wanted to keep my job. So I found myself riding the elevator to the executive floor, my palms sweating despite the building's aggressive air conditioning. Matteo's office occupied the entire northeast corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The space was decorated in dark woods and leather, with artwork that I suspected was original rather than reproduction hanging on the walls. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface meticulously organized. Matteo stood by the windows when I entered, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear as he conducted a conversation in rapid Italian. I caught only fragments, words like shipment and payment and consequences, that confirmed what I'd already suspected about the nature of his business. He ended the call and turned to face me, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp with that same assessment I was beginning to recognize. "Helena, thank you for coming up." "Of course, Mr. De Laurenti. Claire said you needed filing assistance." He gestured toward several boxes stacked near the credenza. "Contracts that need to be organized chronologically and cross-referenced with the digital database. Standard administrative work, but I prefer someone meticulous." I moved toward the boxes, grateful for a concrete task to focus on. The contracts were dense legal documents, many containing terms I didn't fully understand, but that spoke to shipping routes, distribution channels, and payment structures that seemed unnecessarily complex for legitimate consulting work. As I worked, I could feel Matteo's presence even when his back was turned. He moved through the office with purposeful efficiency, making calls, reviewing documents, conducting the business of his empire with the same precision he likely applied to everything else in his life. "You're left-handed," he observed after about 20 minutes, his voice startling me from my focused sorting. I looked up to find him watching me from his desk. "Yes, sir? But you wear your watch on your left wrist." I glanced down at the cheap digital watch Evan had given me for my birthday, one of his apology gifts after a particularly bad night. "I prefer it there. Most left-handed people wear watches on their right wrist. Prevents interference with writing." He paused, then added with deliberate casualness, "Unless they're trying to hide something on their right wrist that a watch band might aggravate." My hands stilled on the contract I was filing. He'd noticed. Of course he'd noticed. Matteo De Laurenti noticed everything. "I just prefer it this way," I said, keeping my voice steady. He stood, moving around his desk with that predatory grace that made my pulse quicken. "Helena, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd appreciate an honest answer." I met his gaze, forcing myself not to look away, even as every instinct screamed at me to run. "Yes, sir? Are you in danger?" The question was so direct, so stripped of pretense that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Not, "Are you okay?" or "Is everything all right?" but the real question, cutting through all my carefully constructed lies to the truth beneath. "No, sir," I whispered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. Mateo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, or determination. "I see." He returned to his desk, and I thought the interrogation was over. But then his phone rang, and I heard him answer in that same controlled tone he used for everything. "Yes, I understand. Where? How long ago? Keep me informed." He ended the call and looked at me with new intensity. "Do you have a police officer named Evan Corbin in your life, Helena?" The name hit me like a physical blow. My carefully maintained composure cracked, genuine fear flooding through me before I could suppress it. "How do you—" "He's been asking questions about you at the building's security desk, claiming he's conducting a welfare check on his girlfriend who works here." Mateo's voice was dangerously soft. "But the security team knows better than to give him information without clearing it with me first." I sank into the nearest chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Evan was here. He'd found out where I worked, something I'd carefully kept from him precisely because I knew he'd use it to tighten his control. "He's my ex-boyfriend," I said quietly, the partial truth easier than a complete fabrication. "We broke up a few weeks ago. He's having trouble accepting it." "And the bruises?" Mateo asked, his tone making it clear he already knew the answer. I looked down at my hands, at the slight tremor I could no longer hide. He didn't take rejection well. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. When I finally looked up, Mateo's expression had shifted into something cold and controlled, the kind of calculated fury that I imagined made his enemies very nervous. "A police officer," he said, more to himself than to me. "That's why you didn't report it, why you believed no one would help you." "He knows people," I whispered. "He knows judges, prosecutors, other officers. He's made it very clear what would happen if I tried to cause problems for him." Mateo pulled out his phone, typing something quickly. "Does he know where you live?" "Yes." "Does he have a key?" I nodded miserably. He wouldn't give it back when we broke up. More typing, then a call. "Marco, I need a security detail on a residential address." He rattled off my apartment building and unit number from memory, making me realize he'd already had me investigated. "Immediate deployment. No one gets near the door without my approval. Yes, including police. I don't care what credentials they show. Clear it through me first." He ended the call and looked at me with an expression that was almost gentle, though his eyes remained hard. "When does your shift end?" 6 o'clock, sir." "You'll leave at 5 today. My driver will take you home. The security team will be in place before you arrive." "Mr. De Laurenti, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling you." His voice carried absolute authority. "And tomorrow, you'll meet with one of my attorneys. We're going to file a restraining order, compile documentation, and ensure that Officer Corbin understands that harassing you carries consequences." Tears burned behind my eyes, the first genuine tears I'd allowed myself in months. "Why are you doing this?" Mateo was quiet for a moment, his gaze holding mine with unexpected intensity. "Because I don't tolerate bullies, Helena, especially ones who hide behind badges." He paused, then added more softly, "And because you deserve better than living in fear." The simple statement, delivered without judgment or pity, broke something inside me. I'd spent so long believing that I somehow deserved Evan's treatment, that I'd provoked him or failed to be good enough, that hearing someone say otherwise with such certainty felt revolutionary. "I don't know how to thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Mateo replied, his expression hardening again. "Just be honest with me from now on. Can you do that?" I nodded, feeling the weight of months of lies beginning to lift. "Yes, sir." "Good." He returned to his desk, his demeanor shifting back to professional efficiency. "Now finish that filing. And Helena, if Corbin contacts you in any way, you tell me immediately. Understood?" "Yes, Mr. De Laurenti." As I returned to my work, my hands steadier than they'd been in months, I caught Matteo watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something in his gaze suggested this was about more than just helping an employee in trouble. But I pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the unexpected safety I was being offered. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, I could be free. The attorney Matteo sent me to was a woman named Victoria Chen, who operated from an office so elegant it made me nervous to sit in the leather chairs. She took one look at the photographs I'd finally allowed myself to take of the bruises, read through the text messages I'd been too afraid to delete, and listened to my halting description of Evan's escalating violence with an expression that grew progressively more severe. "You have a strong case," she said finally, her voice crisp with professional certainty. "Restraining order approved within 48 hours. I guarantee it. Criminal charges are trickier given his position, but not impossible, especially with Mr. De Laurenti's resources backing you." "I don't want to be a charity case," I said quietly, shame coloring my words. Victoria's expression softened slightly. "You're not. Matteo doesn't do charity. He does justice, particularly when the system has failed someone." She paused, then added, "He also doesn't usually get personally involved in employee matters. You must have made quite an impression." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I focused instead on signing the documents she placed before me, each signature feeling like reclaiming a small piece of myself. That evening, when Matteo's driver dropped me at my apartment, I found two men in dark suits stationed discreetly near my door. They nodded respectfully, but didn't speak, their presence both comforting and surreal. Inside my apartment, I finally allowed myself to breathe, really breathe, for the first time in months. My phone buzzed. Evan's number, which I hadn't blocked because deleting his contact felt like provocation. The message was typically manipulative. "Helena, baby, I know you're scared. I was too rough the other night. Let me make it up to you. I love you." My hands shook as I screenshot the message and forwarded it to the number Matteo had given me. His response came within seconds. "Delete his number. Don't respond. You're safe." Two words that I desperately needed to hear. You're safe. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings and careful rebuilding. The restraining order was approved with shocking speed, helped by Victoria's connections and the documentation I'd finally allowed myself to compile. Evan contested it initially, playing the wounded boyfriend card with practiced ease. But when his sergeant was quietly contacted by someone in Matteo's network, and when evidence of Evan's pattern of abuse toward previous girlfriends mysteriously surfaced, his protests died quickly. I began sleeping through the night for the first time in a year. The bruises faded, replaced by clear skin that felt like reclaimed territory. I started arriving at work without the knot of anxiety in my stomach, began participating in office conversations I'd previously avoided. Matteo watched my transformation with quiet approval, never mentioning the measures he'd taken on my behalf, but ensuring I knew the protection remained in place. Our interactions remained professional, though I'd caught him observing me with an intensity that went beyond mere concern for an employee's welfare. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I was organizing files in the executive conference room when I heard raised voices from Matteo's office. Through the partially open door, I could see him standing behind his desk, his expression colder than I'd ever witnessed. "The shipment doesn't just disappear, Marco," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Someone redirected it. I want to know who, and I want to know why." The man across from him, one of Matteo's senior associates, shifted uncomfortably. We're investigating, boss. Could be the Volkov crew making a move. It's not Volkov. Mateo's certainty was absolute. This was internal. Someone in my organization decided they could steal from me and hide behind outside conflict. I should have left. Should have given them privacy for what was clearly sensitive business. But something kept me frozen in place, watching as Mateo demonstrated the ruthless authority that made him feared throughout the city's underground. Find them, Mateo continued, his voice dropping even lower. And when you do, remind them why betrayal carries permanent consequences. The casual reference to violence should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself fascinated by this glimpse into Mateo's real world, the empire built on power and fear that existed beneath the legitimate business veneer. Marco left, and Mateo looked up to find me standing in the conference room doorway. Our eyes met, and I saw him decide in real time whether to maintain the fiction of normalcy or acknowledge what I'd just witnessed. "How much did you hear?" he asked finally. "Enough to know that Morrison and Associates isn't really about corporate consulting." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And I'm not surprised. I moved into his office, closing the door behind me in a gesture that felt significant. "I've been processing your contracts for almost a year, Mr. De Laurenti. I might be many things, but I'm not oblivious." Mateo leaned against his desk, studying me with renewed interest. "Most people would be frightened by what you just heard." "Most people haven't had a police officer use his badge to terrorize them for 6 months, I replied, surprised by my own boldness. "Compared to Evan, you're refreshingly honest about what you are." "And what am I, Helena?" I considered the question carefully. "You're someone who operates outside legal boundaries but maintains his own code, someone who protects his people and punishes betrayal, someone who helped me when I had nowhere else to turn." That sounds almost admiring. It's factual. I moved closer, drawn by something I couldn't quite name. "You've shown me more genuine protection in 3 weeks than Evan did in an entire relationship. So yes, I'm aware you're dangerous. I'm also aware you've never once made me afraid." Something shifted in Mateo's expression, a crack in his usual control. "You should be afraid of me, Helena. What I do, the world I operate in, it destroys everything soft and good it touches. Then why help me?" I challenged. "Why not just ignore another employee's problems?" He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Because when I saw those bruises, when you tried to lie to me with that ridiculous story about falling, I wanted to find whoever hurt you and make them understand what real fear feels like." The raw honesty in his voice sent a shiver through me. And because you looked at me in that storage room like I might actually believe you, like you'd become so accustomed to being dismissed that honest concern was foreign." His jaw tightened. No one should have to live like that. I took another step closer, close enough now to smell his cologne, to see the faint scar along his left temple that I'd never noticed before. "What happens now?" "Now you finish healing," Mateo said softly. "You continue rebuilding your life. You stay safe." "And us?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "Is there an us?" Mateo reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with surprising gentleness. "There shouldn't be. You deserve someone whose world doesn't include the kind of violence I deal in daily." "But," I pressed, holding his gaze. "But I can't seem to stop thinking about you," he admitted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "About how brave you are, how you walked into work every day hiding pain no one should have to endure. About how you're rebuilding yourself piece by piece with a strength most of my soldiers don't possess." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I'm thinking about you too. Helena, I know what you are, Matteo. I used his first name deliberately, watching his eyes darken at the intimacy. I know you're dangerous. I know being close to you means entering a world most people never see. But I also know that you make me feel safer than anyone ever has. That you've given me my life back. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses that spoke to violence committed. If we do this, there's no going back. My enemies will know you matter to me. The target on my back extends to you. Evan was a target I didn't choose, I said quietly. You would be one I did. Matteo's thumb traced my cheekbone with devastating tenderness. You're sure? Instead of answering, I closed the remaining distance between us and kissed him. His response was immediate and controlled, one hand sliding into my hair, while the other settled at my waist, pulling me closer with a possessiveness that should have frightened me, but instead made me feel claimed in the best possible way. When we finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Matteo rested his forehead against mine. This changes everything. I know, I whispered. I'll protect you with everything I have. I know that too. He kissed me again, slower this time, deeper, and I felt the last of my carefully constructed walls crumble. I was free from Evan's violence, free from fear, and falling for a man who was dangerous to everyone except me. It should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming home. The transition from professional distance to acknowledged intimacy happened with surprising naturalness, as if we'd both been waiting for permission to stop pretending. Matteo didn't hide our relationship from his organization, though he was strategic about how it was presented. I wasn't just another woman he was seeing. I was under his protection, which in his world carried weight and consequences. People will talk, he warned me one evening as we shared dinner in his private office, a routine we'd established over the past 2 weeks. They'll say you're with me for money or power or safety. I set down my fork, meeting his gaze steadily. Let them talk. I know the truth. Which is? That you saw me when I'd become invisible to myself. That you offered me a choice when I thought I had none. I paused, then added with a slight smile. And that you're surprisingly romantic for someone whose phone conversations occasionally include the phrase, handle it permanently. Matteo's expression softened, the hard edges smoothing into something almost tender. You're good for me, Helena. You remind me that there's more to life than power and control. And you're good for me, I replied honestly. You showed me what protection without possession looks like. He reached across the desk, taking my hand in his thumb tracing circles on my palm. About that, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. The seriousness in his tone made me tense. Okay. The man who redirected my shipment? We found him. One of my lieutenants, someone I'd trusted for 5 years. Matteo's jaw tightened. He admitted under questioning that he was approached by a third party who wanted information about my operations. Someone willing to pay well for details about my security, my routines, my vulnerabilities. My stomach dropped. Who? Evan Corbin. The name hit me like ice water. What? Matteo's grip on my hand tightened protectively. Your ex has been conducting his own investigation into me for weeks. He found out about our relationship, about the protection I've provided you, and he's decided I'm the reason you left him. That's insane, I whispered. I left him because he was hurting me. Abusers rarely accept responsibility for losing control over their victims, Matteo said grimly. He's convinced himself that I manipulated you, stole you from him, and now he's trying to find a way to hurt me through you. Fear clawed at my throat. The restraining order means nothing to someone who's decided he has nothing left to lose. Matteo stood, moving around the desk to pull me into his arms. Which is why I'm moving you. I pulled back to look at him. What? Your apartment isn't secure enough. Not if Corbin is actively targeting you. I have a property, a secure building with full security detail. Private entrance, reinforced everything, completely monitored. His dark eyes held mine with absolute certainty. You'll be safe there. Matteo, I can't just move into your place. It's not my place, he interrupted gently. It's a property I own, but I don't live there. Separate from my personal residence, completely secure, yours to use as long as you need. I studied his face, seeing both the command and the concern beneath. You've already decided this. Yes. No apology, just honesty. I won't negotiate on your safety, Helena. Part of me wanted to argue, to insist on maintaining some independence, but the larger part, the part that had learned to recognize genuine protection, understood he was right. Evan was escalating, and staying in my vulnerable apartment was foolish pride masquerading as independence. Okay, I said quietly. When? Relief flashed across Matteo's features. Tonight. I already have people packing your belongings. Everything will be moved and secured before morning. You were that certain I'd agree? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I was that certain you're smart enough to recognize the difference between control and protection. He was right, of course. The apartment he moved me into was beautiful. A 2-bedroom unit in a building that looked residential from the outside, but housed security features I'd only seen in movies. Fingerprint entry, bulletproof glass, panic buttons in every room. It should have felt like a cage, but instead, it felt like sanctuary. Matteo visited frequently, though he was careful to respect boundaries, never assuming his protection entitled him to intimacy. We fell into a rhythm of shared dinners, long conversations that stretched past midnight, moments of connection that deepened what was growing between us. 3 weeks after the move, as we sat on the apartment's balcony watching the city lights, I asked the question that had been building in my mind. What will you do about Evan? Matteo was quiet for a moment, his profile sharp against the night sky. What do you want me to do? I want him to stop, I said honestly. I want him to face consequences for what he did to me, for what he's trying to do now. But I don't want you to become a monster because of him. He turned to face me, his expression serious. Helena, I'm already what I am. The question is whether you can accept that some problems in my world are solved with methods your world would consider extreme. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not, I said carefully. I'm asking you not to let him corrupt what we have. Don't let his obsession with me turn this into violence that stains us. Matteo pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me with protective strength. You're asking me to show restraint when everything in me wants to eliminate the threat he represents. I'm asking you to trust that there are other ways, I said against his chest. You have lawyers, connections, evidence of his corruption. Destroy his career, his credibility, his ability to hurt anyone else. But don't destroy yourself in the process. He was silent for a long moment, and I could feel the tension in his body, the war between his instincts and my request. Finally, he pressed a kiss to the top of my head. For you, he said quietly. I'll do it your way. But if he comes near you, if he so much as threatens you again, all promises are void. Deal. The campaign against Evan was methodical and devastating. Victoria Chen presented evidence of his abuse to internal affairs, backed by testimony from his previous victims who'd been too afraid to come forward before. Matteo's connections ensured the investigation couldn't be buried. Within 2 months, Evan Corbin was fired, facing criminal charges, and effectively destroyed professionally. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt free. The night the news broke, Matteo found me on the balcony again, staring at the city with emotions I couldn't quite name. Regrets? He asked softly, coming to stand beside me. No. I leaned into him, his warmth grounding me. Just processing. A year ago, I thought I'd never escape him. Now he's facing everything he put me through. Justice, Matteo murmured. It took longer than I wanted, but it's complete. I turned in his arms, looking up at his face. Thank you. For listening to me. For doing this the way I asked. For being more than what people think you are. His hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch gentle despite the violence those same hands had committed. You make me want to be better, Helena. You make me remember there's more to power than fear. And you make me remember I'm worth protecting, I whispered. He kissed me then, and in that moment, I understood that I'd fallen completely for this complicated, dangerous man who had given me back my life. Not because I needed his protection, but because I chose to love him despite, and because of everything he was. When we finally broke apart, Matteo's eyes held a question. Move in with me, my actual home, not this safe house. Be with me fully. Are you sure? I asked. Your world, your life, it's not exactly normal. Nothing about us is normal, he replied with a slight smile. But it's real. You're the most real thing in my life, Helena. I want you with me. I thought about the journey from that first collision in the hallway to this moment. About bruises faded and lies abandoned. About fear replaced with trust. Survival replaced with living. Yes, I said simply. Yes. His smile transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter, almost vulnerable. And as he kissed me again under the city lights, I knew I'd made the right choice. I'd chosen freedom, and in doing so, I'd found love. Moving into Matteo's home was like entering a different world. One where luxury wasn't just about expensive objects, but about a level of security and comfort I'd never imagined. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building in the city's most exclusive district, with views that stretched to the horizon and security measures that made my previous apartment look like a dollhouse. This is too much, I said the first night, standing in the master bedroom that was larger than my entire previous apartment. Matteo came up behind me, his hand settling on my waist. It's home. Our home now, if you want it to be. I turned in his arms, studying his face in the dim lighting. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house with 4 siblings. I'm not sure I know how to live like this. You'll learn, he said with a slight smile. Besides, it's not about the space or the luxury. It's about being somewhere you're completely safe, where you never have to hide or pretend, or fear. He was right, of course. The true luxury wasn't the marble bathrooms or the chef's kitchen I barely knew how to use. It was the freedom to exist without constantly monitoring my surroundings, without calculating exit strategies, without bracing for violence. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Matteo's staff was discreet but present, people who appeared to handle household management, security, and various undefined tasks that I suspected had more to do with his underground operations than legitimate business. They treated me with respect that bordered on deference, clearly taking their cues from Matteo's obvious regard for me. They're very formal, I mentioned one morning over breakfast, watching as the housekeeper silently refreshed our coffee before disappearing. They're protective, Matteo corrected. They've seen me with many women over the years, none I've brought into my actual home. They know you're different, that you matter. Do I? I asked, only half teasing. His dark eyes held mine with absolute certainty. You're everything, Helena. The simplicity of the statement, delivered without flowery language or grand gestures, made my throat tight with emotion. I love you, I said, the first time I'd spoken the words aloud. Matteo's expression softened in a way I'd only seen when we were alone. I've loved you since you tried to lie to me about falling downstairs, standing there with such desperate courage. I just didn't understand it yet. We fell into a rhythm of domesticity that felt surreal given Matteo's dangerous profession. He left early for mysterious meetings, returned for shared dinners, included me in his legitimate business decisions while carefully shielding me from the darker aspects of his empire. I continued working at Morrison & Associates, promoted now to a senior administrative role that came with respect and considerably better pay. But the peace couldn't last forever. 2 months into our new arrangement, I was working late in Mateo's home office when I accidentally knocked over a stack of files, sending papers scattering across the floor. As I gathered them, my eyes caught on a surveillance photo paper clipped to a report. Evan. Multiple images of him at different locations, timestamps indicating they'd been taken over the past several weeks. The report detailed his movements, his contacts, his current employment status, or lack thereof. I was still staring at the photos when Mateo returned home, his expression shifting from pleasure at seeing me to concern when he noticed what I held. "Helena." "You're still watching him," I said, not quite a question. He moved closer, but didn't try to take the file from my hands. "Yes." "Why?" "He's been neutralized. He can't hurt me anymore." Mateo's jaw tightened. "Can't he? He's lost everything because of me, because I protected you. Men like him don't just accept defeat and move on, Helena. They fester, they plan, they wait for opportunities." I set the photos down carefully. "So you're having him followed indefinitely?" "I'm ensuring that if he makes any move toward you, I know about it before it happens." His voice was firm, but gentle. "I won't apologize for that." I understood his logic, even as part of me recoiled from the idea of perpetual surveillance. "And if he never makes a move? If he just goes away and rebuilds his life somewhere else? Then the surveillance continues, until I'm certain he's no longer a threat." Mateo pulled me into his arms, his embrace protective. "I know it seems excessive to you, but in my world, threats eliminated halfway return to destroy you. I won't take that chance with your safety." I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Sometimes I forget how different our worlds are." "They're not different anymore," he said quietly. "You're in my world now, which means you're protected by its rules." The reminder was both comforting and unsettling. I'd chosen this life, chosen Mateo, but I was still learning what that choice truly meant. That understanding came sharply into focus a week later, when I returned from work to find the penthouse in subtle lockdown. Additional security personnel were stationed at every entrance, and Mateo was in his office conducting a meeting in rapid Italian that carried tones of danger and strategy. "What's happening?" I asked Marco, who'd become a familiar presence around the penthouse. His expression was carefully neutral. "A situation. Nothing for you to worry about, Miss Rossi." But I did worry, pacing the living room while Mateo's meeting stretched into its second hour. When he finally emerged, his expression was harder than I'd seen it since the early days. "Tell me," I said simply. He studied me for a moment, then nodded, respecting me enough to be honest. "One of my business partners attempted to manipulate some contracts, redirect some profits. It's been handled." "Handled how?" "In a way that ensures he won't try it again." Mateo's voice was flat, controlled, and in a way that sends a message to anyone else considering similar betrayal. I knew better than to ask for details. Instead, I moved to him, taking his hands in mine. "Are you all right?" The question seemed to surprise him. "I should be asking you that. You just witnessed the reality of what I do, the consequences I enforce." "I witnessed you protecting what's yours," I said carefully. "I don't need to know the methods to understand the necessity." Something in his expression cracked, vulnerability showing through his controlled exterior. "You're not frightened?" "Of you? Never." I squeezed his hands. "For you sometimes, but not of you." He pulled me close, his embrace tight enough to betray the tension he'd been holding. "I don't deserve you. You deserve someone who sees you fully and loves you anyway," I replied. That's what you've got." We stood like that for a long moment, and I felt him gradually relax, the hardness leaving his body as he allowed himself to be vulnerable in a way I suspected he rarely permitted. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Mateo traced patterns on my shoulder with gentle fingers. "I want you to learn to shoot," he said quietly. I turned to face him. "What?" "I want you to know how to protect yourself if I'm not there. Not because I think you'll need to, but because I want you to have every possible advantage." His dark eyes held mine seriously. "Will you let me teach you?" It was such a Mateo request, practicality wrapped in protection. "Okay," I agreed. The shooting lessons became a regular part of our routine, conducted at a private range Mateo owned. He was patient and thorough, treating my education with the same seriousness he brought to everything else. I discovered I had natural aptitude, something that seemed to both please and concern him. "You're good at this," he observed after a particularly successful session. "Survival instincts," I said lightly. "I learned to recognize threats early with Evan. This is just a different application of the same awareness." Mateo's expression darkened at the mention of my ex. "He tried to contact your mother last week." I went still. "What?" "He showed up at her house, claimed he was worried about you, wanted to make sure you were all right." Mateo's voice was controlled fury. "She called my people immediately, exactly as instructed. He was removed from the property before any real contact occurred. My mother knew about Mateo, about our relationship, and had surprisingly accepted it with more grace than I'd expected. She'd seen me at my lowest during the Evan months, had watched me rebuild, and she credited Mateo with that transformation." "Is she okay?" I asked. "She's fine. Shaken, but fine." He paused. "This is escalation, Helena. He's testing boundaries, looking for vulnerabilities." "So what do we do?" "We tighten security and wait," Mateo said grimly. "He'll make a mistake eventually. They always do." The mistake came 2 weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday evening when I was working late at the office. I'd sent Mateo's driver home, planning to take a cab, wanting a moment of normalcy in my increasingly protected life. I was locking my office door when I heard footsteps behind me, too heavy and purposeful to belong to the cleaning staff. I turned to find Evan standing in the hallway, his appearance disheveled, his eyes carrying a wildness I'd never seen before. "Hello, Helena," he said softly. "We need to talk." My hand moved instinctively to my phone, but Evan was faster, closing the distance between us and gripping my wrist with familiar, painful pressure. "Don't," he said, his voice carrying that dangerous calm I remembered too well. "Just talk to me. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." My training with Mateo kicked in, the hours of self-defense and awareness translating into automatic assessment. Evan was blocking the main exit, but there was a stairwell 20 feet behind me. He was bigger and stronger, but desperate, which made him unpredictable. "How did you get in here?" I asked, buying time while my thumb found the emergency contact on my phone, the one Mateo had programmed to alert his entire security network with a single press. "I still have friends, Helena. Friends who don't think you should be shacking up with a criminal." His grip tightened, making me wince. "Do you have any idea what you've done to my life? Everything I worked for, gone because of your lies." "They weren't lies," I said quietly, pressing the button while maintaining eye contact. "You hurt me, Evan. Repeatedly." I finally found the courage to stop pretending that was normal. "I loved you." His voice rose, echoes bouncing off the empty hallway. "I gave you everything, and you threw it away for what? For him? For a goddamn mobster who's using you?" "Mateo doesn't use me," I replied, and was surprised by the certainty in my voice. "He protects me. He sees me. He's never once made me afraid." "Because you haven't seen what he really is yet," Evan spat. Do you know what I've learned about Matteo De Laurenti? The people he's hurt, the lives he's destroyed? You think you're safe with him? Safer than I ever was with you. The truth of that statement hit him visibly, rage flooding his features. You ungrateful. He didn't finish the sentence. The stairwell door burst open and Marco appeared, flanked by 2 other security personnel. Their weapons were drawn but not pointed, their presence a clear but controlled threat. Step away from her, Marco said calmly. Now. Evan's grip loosened fractionally, his eyes darting between the armed men and me. This is illegal detention. I'm a police officer. You're a fired police officer with an active restraining order who's currently violating that order. A new voice cut in. I looked past Marco to see Victoria Chen emerging from the stairwell, her expression coldly professional. And we have you on security camera assaulting Ms. Rossi, so I'd suggest you comply before this goes from violation to felony assault. Evan released me, and I immediately stepped back, putting distance between us. Helena, please. She's done talking to you. Matteo's voice carried down the hallway, and I turned to see him approaching with that controlled fury I recognized. He moved past his security team, positioning himself between Evan and me without ever breaking eye contact with my ex. In fact, you're done with her entirely. You can't just... Evan started. I can, and I am. Matteo's voice was soft, dangerous. You violated a restraining order, assaulted her in a building I own, and threatened someone under my protection. The only question now is how much worse you want this to get. Evan laughed, a bitter sound edged with desperation. What are you going to do? Kill me? Make me disappear? Show her exactly what kind of monster you are? Matteo smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on his face. Nothing so dramatic. Victoria has already filed charges for tonight's violation. The security footage of you assaulting Helena will be provided to the prosecutor. Your probation from the previous charges will be revoked. He paused, letting each consequence land. And I'll ensure that every law enforcement agency in the state knows exactly what kind of officer you were. You won't work in security, law enforcement, or anything requiring trust ever again. That's not... Evan's protest died as Matteo stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. It's over, Corbin. You lost. Not because I took her from you, but because you drove her away with your own violence. Now you have a choice. Accept that, and move on with what's left of your life. Or continue this obsession, and discover exactly how much worse I can make things for you. The 2 men stared at each other, and I could see the moment Evan understood he was beaten. His shoulders slumped, defeat replacing rage. Take him to the police, Matteo ordered Marco. File the charges. Make sure everything is documented. As security escorted Evan away, Matteo turned to me, his expression transforming from cold authority to concerned tenderness in an instant. Did he hurt you? I looked at my wrist, already showing the red marks that would become bruises. Nothing serious. His jaw tightened, and he gently took my hand, examining the damage with careful attention. I should have had someone with you. I sent the driver away, I admitted. I wanted to feel normal for a few hours. Normal doesn't exist for us anymore, he said quietly, pulling me into his arms. Not while you're mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have bothered me, but instead, it felt like safety. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for wanting independence. Just promise me you'll be smarter about it. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. I can't protect you if you actively avoid protection. I promise. We stood like that for a long moment, and I felt the adrenaline of the confrontation gradually fading, replaced by the solid certainty of Matteo's presence. What happens now? I asked. Now we go home, he said. Evan will be processed, charged, likely serve time for the violation. His obsession with you ends tonight, one way or another. And it did. The charges stuck. Evan's probation was revoked, and he was sentenced to 18 months. By the time he was released, I'd heard he'd moved to a different state, taken a job in private security that had nothing to do with law enforcement, and finally accepted that I was beyond his reach. Life with Mateo settled into its own rhythm after that. I learned to navigate his world, the legitimate business, and the shadowy empire that existed beneath. I discovered I had a talent for seeing patterns in his operations, for identifying inefficiencies and potential problems. Gradually, I became more than just the woman he protected. I became a trusted advisor, someone whose insight he valued. "You're good at this," he said one evening as I pointed out a discrepancy in one of his shipping manifests that would have cost him significantly if unnoticed. "I'm good at seeing what doesn't fit," I replied. Survival skill from living with Evan. I learned to notice when things were off, when danger was building. Mateo's expression softened. "You've turned trauma into strength. Not many people can do that." "I had help," I said, reaching for his hand. "You showed me what safety feels like, made me believe I deserved it." He pulled me into his lap, his arms wrapping around me with protective strength. "You deserve everything, Helena. Safety, respect, love, all of it. I have all of it," I whispered. "With you." 6 months after Evan's final arrest, Mateo proposed. Not with a grand gesture or public spectacle, but in the privacy of our home, with words that were simple and devastatingly sincere. "Marry me," he said one morning over coffee. "Not because I own you or possess you, but because I love you. Because you make me want to be better than what I am. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it." I said yes without hesitation. And when he slid the ring onto my finger, a platinum band with a single perfect diamond, I understood that I'd found something I'd stopped believing existed. A man who was dangerous to everyone except me, who protected without possessing, who loved without controlling. Our wedding was small, intimate, attended by the few people in both our lives who understood what we'd built together. My mother cried happy tears, Victoria Chen served as my maid of honor, and Marco stood beside Mateo, the first time I'd seen either of them show genuine emotion. But the moment that defined everything came during our vows. Mateo had written his own, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. "I promise to protect you without imprisoning you, to love you without owning you, to honor your strength while offering my own. You saved me, Helena, from a life where power was the only thing that mattered. Now you're the only thing that matters." I'd written my own vows too, and when I spoke, I saw his eyes glisten with uncharacteristic moisture. "You saw me when I'd become invisible to myself. You offered me safety when I'd forgotten I deserved it. You showed me that protection and freedom aren't opposites, that strength and gentleness can exist in the same person. I love you not despite the darkness in your world, but because you've never let it touch me. You're my home, Mateo. My choice. My future." As we kissed to seal our vows, I thought about the journey from bruised and broken to whole and free, about the mistake of a man who thought violence was love, and the gift of a man who understood the difference. Matteo De Laurenti was feared by many, respected by more, and loved completely by me. Not because I needed his protection, though he offered it freely, but because he'd given me something more valuable: the power to protect myself, the courage to demand what I deserved, and the freedom to choose love on my own terms. We built a life together that balanced his dangerous world with my need for normalcy. I continued working, eventually taking over management of his legitimate businesses, discovering I had a talent for strategy and negotiation. He included me in decisions, valued my insight, treated me as an equal partner rather than a possession to be guarded. And on the nights when his darker business required attention, when he returned home with that cold edge I recognized, I was there to remind him of who he was beyond the violence and power. I was the softness in his hard world, and he was the strength that allowed me to be soft without being vulnerable. Our first anniversary fell on a rainy Tuesday, exactly like the night Evan had made his final attempt to control me. We spent it at home, cooking together in the kitchen, laughing at my attempts to properly season the pasta sauce under Matteo's amused instruction. "You know," I said as we ate dinner on the balcony, rain creating a curtain of privacy around us. "A year ago I couldn't have imagined this. Being happy, feeling safe, loving someone without fear." Matteo reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined that a woman trying to lie about falling downstairs would become the most important person in my world." "No regrets?" I asked, only half teasing. "Not one." His dark eyes held mine with absolute certainty. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Helena. My choice, my love, my life." "Forever," I whispered. "Forever," he confirmed. And as he kissed me under the rain-dark sky, I knew it was true. We'd both been broken in different ways. Both learned to survive in worlds that tried to destroy us. But together, we'd built something unbreakable. I'd lied about the bruises once, too afraid to tell the truth. Now I lived in absolute honesty with a man who saw through every pretense to the real me beneath. A man who'd stopped me from drowning in fear and shown me how to swim. Matteo De Laurenti had given me my life back, and in return, I'd given him my heart, freely and completely, knowing it would be protected as fiercely as he protected everything else he considered his. Not because I was his possession, but because I was his choice. And he was mine.